Hello and welcome to another edition of The Real USA. Today we're at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. We thank you for your interest in the program and in these stories from the United States that you'll only find on teleSUR. I'm Alexandra Hall. As you follow along these stories, we invite you to post to our Twitter at teleSUR English. In last week's midterm elections, 58% of voters in Denton, Texas voted to support a measure that bans fracking in their town. It's the first town in Texas to ban the controversial method of oil and gas extraction. Our next story is about the campaign that residents waged to make the change.
They're not much to look at. Small plots of land with compact pieces of machinery. But campaigners say these small fracking sites creating disproportionately large problems.
The health impacts are just too severe to feel safe in your own property.
In the Texas city of Denton, though, size can be deceptive. After all, this is the place where a small community has beaten the odds and fought off big industry.
It seems to be an industry that has more rights than a human being does or a family does.
Adam Briggle and Kathy McMullen have spent months fighting to make their city frack-free. They've convinced the city council to put a temporary ban on any new fracking sites, but that hasn't been easy.
On a scale of 1 to 10, the help we've received from the city is probably a -5. They have fought us every step of the way, put out fear campaigns, like, the city's going to be sued and it's a $6 million lawsuit.
Wells have been springing up around the city. There are now around 275. This is one of the newest and largest, but many are near housing developments. It's the proximity of sites like these to residential homes that's causing the real concern for people living in the area. As you can see at this location, just south of the city, there's just a road separating the fracking site from the houses just across the street. Campaigners say because of the wells, the city has the worst air quality and highest asthma rates in the state. They also report cases of constant headaches, sinus problems, nosebleeds, and breathing difficulties near sites.
The biggest concerns are health and safety issues. The proximity of these fracking sites is much too close to places where kids and families are. So we're talking about toxic chemicals that are released, including benzene and many others. But there's also property rights concerns where people aren't able to enjoy their own homes because these industries are allowed to set up so close.
Fracking, or hydraulic fracturing, is the process of blasting water, sand and chemicals into underground minerals to release oil and gas. The problem is the city of Denton sits on top of the Barnett Shale, perhaps the largest natural gas reserve in the country. And that means huge financial possibilities for drilling companies. The main one in Denton, Eagle Ridge Energy, has defended the fracking process, saying there is no question that wells can be drilled and fracked safely.
The industry is so powerful, especially in Texas, that they're able to throw their weight around and get what they want.
Fighting a multi-billion-dollar industry is not easy. Recent estimates put the annual revenues from fracking in the US at around $76 billion. The industry also gives significant financial support to political campaigns. To help persuade lawmakers, fracking is safe. Between 1990 and 2011, it's estimated oil and gas companies donated around $965 million. Some of the largest sums went to politicians in Texas. For Denton to have fought this industry and won is a significant achievement.
I do think it's important that the people who are surrounded by these industrial activities are the ones who have the say about whether or not it should be happening. So we're really in support of local self-determination.
And momentum seems to be building. The Denton Drilling Awareness Group has already been asked by other states to help them with their own anti-fracking campaigns.
There are some small towns that really have no voice. And so they're looking to us. If you can do it, then can you show us how to do it?
The temporary ban on new fracking sites runs until September, when the campaign group hopes the council will pass a permanent ban or let voters decide the issue at the polls. Nick Harper for teleSUR, Denton, Texas.
According to organizations like Environmental Action and Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, companies that employ fracking to extract oil and gas are pretty powerful. They're currently the underwriters of news outlets like National Public Radio, and they've also been known to finance election campaigns.
They are demanding public-funded radio station NPR to stop pro-fracking advertisements.
Doing a radio show live from the front steps of NPR to talk about the fact that they've been airing pro-fracking ads on the radio for the last several months. We think these are really misleading statements. The hosts of NPR, the anchors we trust to bring us news and information, are actually reading these statements about fracked natural gas, which are very misleading, entirely untrue. And activists around the country have been calling on NPR to...
has helped support his family's farm with the production of natural gas on their land. Thinkaboutit.org. This is NPR.
This public radio station makes a profit of hundreds of thousands of dollars with these kinds of ads. However, it causes outrage amongst those aware of the dangers of fracking.
When people are fracking, the gases that are released, everything from radioactive gases to methane, people can light fires at their faucets. This is not healthy for people.
Gas drilling companies which use fracking don't control public stations in the US, but they finance the electoral campaigns, such as these past midterm elections.
This has affected both Democrats and Republicans. The fracking companies have given money across the board to both parties. They want members of Congress not to start regulating fracking, and it's the money that will help keep that from happening.
According to Citizens for Ethics, from 2004 to 2012, fracking companies' investments in electoral campaigns soared 241%, resulting in the election of many of their own candidates, as this environmentalist states.
Basically, oil companies, mainly fracking companies, both American democracy. We are not sure about the amount of money these companies have put in electoral campaigns in 2014, but going back to 2012, they invested $300 million in candidates to meet their selfish, polluting interests.
As a result of these past midterm elections, there was a referendum banning fracking in at least 3 cities, triggering rage and legal complaints by energy companies.
Francesca Manuele, Washington, teleSUR.
For decades, certain regions of the United States have been experiencing unprecedented record temperatures and drought. Now residents of Wichita Falls, northern Texas, are learning to deal with what is already a very difficult situation. Nick Harper has the story.
4 years ago, Lake Arrowhead looked like this. But record temperatures and a deficit of rainfall have almost drained the lake dry. All of this should be water. But where there were once boats and swimmers, there are now dead fish and empty beer cans. The receding water has left the boat slip far behind, now 50 metres from the water's edge, while the moorings sit high and dry.
We're down to 23% full, so just over 3/4 of the lake is gone right now.
The man in charge of the area says this is the lowest the lake has ever been.
I've come to this lake my whole life as a kid, come fishing, come boating, camping, and the lake's always been full. For folks who have been around this part of Texas and have used this lake a lot, it's very troublesome for them because this is a place where they came to enjoy and have so many memories at, and now they come out here and the lake's not here.
With visitor numbers down from 100,000 a year to 30,000, tourists have to content themselves with the wildlife rather than the water sports. But the real problem is that Lake Arrowhead is the city's main source of water. This lake was last full just over 4 years ago. Since then, the level of the water and the number of people visiting the area has slowly drained away. So much so that this spot where I'm standing should be 18 feet or 5.5 meters underwater. The weather has certainly changed in this region in recent years. Central and southern parts of the US have seen temperatures rise. Some say climate change is to blame. Over the last 4 years, Wichita Falls has had the driest spell since records began in 1897. In 2011, there were more than 100 days of over 100-degree temperatures, far above the average of just 28 days. And it's only received 40% of its usual rainfall, meaning the city now has a rain deficit of 1.5 years. Further south, the fields are untouched by the drought. But travel north, and its impact is clearly visible. The patchy grass and bare earth show signs of several years of too much heat and too little rainfall.
Basically, a city is completely drying up.
Local meteorologist Ken Johnson says this is the worst drought the area has ever seen. The tipping point came in 2011, when rainfall was 2/3 below average.
I don't see, at least for now, things getting better anytime soon. But it's hard to be a forecaster in this type of an environment. It's a real challenge to me because I have to find ways to make my shows interesting. Because every single day is the same. It never changes. Hot, dry, windy.
The lack of rainfall has led the city to impose severe water restrictions on its residents and fines of up to $2,000 for anyone who uses too much water.
From the few years that I've been here, the summers have been really hot. We've been in 100+ degree weather, so it's not that much of a surprise to me.
It definitely has affected me. The whole point is to make people aware, because sometimes we're not aware of how much water we are using. So I think it's good, and especially starting young from the younger kids, so they grow up being aware and more cautious about how much water they're using.
I have heard things like we're pretty close to running out of water. That's a little scary.
Time is running out for Wichita Falls. The city is working on a plan to convert wastewater into drinking water. But even with that, the predictions are the city will run out of water in just over 2 years' time. Nick Harper for teleSUR, Wichita Falls.
As climate change brings higher temperatures to certain parts of the United States, drinking water is becoming a coveted natural resource. Our next story is about a group of residents in Wichita Falls who, faced with a dire situation, turned wastewater into drinking water.
Northern Texas is experiencing perhaps its worst ever drought. And yet all this water is being wasted. 4 million gallons a day of treated drinking water is simply being thrown away. It's because regulators are still deciding if the water is clean enough to drink. For the last few months, the city has been trialling a new source of water, wastewater. Usually, most of the city's supply comes from here, Lake Arrowhead, but 4 years of drought has decimated lake levels. Rain occasionally falls, but not enough and not in the right place. The rainfall that would normally run into the lakes is simply being absorbed by the dry, parched land.
Anytime you're in a drought and you're watching your lake levels decline, there's always in the back of your mind, will we run out of water?
Daniel Nix is the man in charge of the city's water supply. He's had to declare a Stage 5 drought catastrophe, the highest risk level, and forced people to use less water. But it still hasn't been enough, so a new source of water has been found. The city installed this 21-kilometre pipeline, so the water leaving the waste plant could come straight here to the water treatment facility to be cleaned. And Nick says the reaction from residents has been overwhelmingly positive.
When we pitched this to them early on, back in mid-2012, we didn't have anybody stand up and pound the table and say, absolutely not, we're not doing this in Wichita Falls. What I hear most from people is what's taking so long? Why isn't this online? We're running out of water.
For some, though, the idea of toilet to tap is hard to swallow.
Sounds kind of gross. If I didn't know, I would drink it, but if I knew, I wouldn't really want to.
It may sound like it's gross, but more than likely you've already drunk water like that before.
I usually drink bottled water, but it's fine to water plants that's in our homes. But I mean, I think if they have the science to make sure that it's clean and it's okay for us to drink, then awesome.
The biggest cost for the city has been the pipeline. It raised a $13 million bond to buy it. But even with this new process, without significant rainfall, the city will run out of water in 2 years.
I don't fear it, and it doesn't keep me up at night, but it always plays on my mind. I wake up thinking about it. I go to bed thinking about it. As I work through the day, obviously I'm thinking about it. But when I go home, as I'm eating dinner or I'm interacting with my family, I'm thinking about it.
What's happening in Texas, especially with global warming, shows just how important a resource water is becoming. In the future, if water becomes even more scarce, there are fears that wars could be fought over this precious natural resource, and places like Texas would have no strategic importance and become forgotten dust bowls. For now, Wichita Falls must wait for the regulators to decide if their water quality is good enough. Until then, water they can't afford to lose is simply going to waste. Nick Harper for teleSUR, Wichita Falls, Texas.
According to the World Health Organization, already 5,000 people have died from Ebola in West Africa. Meanwhile, the U.S. government has been forced to adjust its response as thousands of Americans call on President Obama to take the necessary steps to protect them. Correspondent Priscilla Huff has our story.
Thank you, Doctor.
Top congressmen are demanding answers on the Obama administration's response to the Ebola epidemic.
People are scared. We need all hands on deck. We need a strategy, and we need to protect the American people, first and foremost. It's not a drill. People's lives are at stake, and the response so far has been unacceptable.
The U.S. Centers for Disease Control, tasked with the response, is on the defensive.
There are no shortcuts in the control of Ebola, and it is not easy to control it. To protect the United States, we have to stop it at the source. There's a lot of fear of Ebola, and I will tell you, as the director of CDC, one of the things I fear about Ebola is that it could spread more widely in Africa. If this were to happen, it could become a threat to our health system and the health care we give for a long time to come.
That's exactly why the Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives has called for a ban on flights arriving from the West African nations most affected by the Ebola epidemic. With just 22% of Americans saying they have a lot of confidence in the U.S. government's response to Ebola, U.S. President Barack Obama has been forced to name a czar, a special fixer, and to hold emergency meetings to figure out what to do.
What you can't do in this modern globalized world is put some cellophane tape around a region of the world and expect to keep out a highly pathogenic infectious disease. It doesn't work that way. It's inhumane.
And Americans do want to help. Volunteers have taken it upon themselves to receive special training before they leave their jobs and head over to West Africa to help care for the ever-expanding number of Ebola cases.
We're going to be taking care of patients and trying to give them the best shot possible. I think with proper care, we can get the mortality rate down to maybe 30%, and that's what I'm hoping for, because I'm not going over there to carry body bags. I'm over there to help and to give them the best shot possible.
Even U.S. government officials admit more needs to be done. Washington has promised just 17 Ebola treatment units for Africa, where 9,000 cases have been confirmed. That compares to America, where the 2 infected nurses are in treatment in one of 4 special isolation units. The hospital here at the National Institutes of Health, where Nancy Pham is being treated, is one of 4 locations around the United States which have the facilities to treat Ebola patients. But Americans question whether this is enough and whether their government is dedicating enough resources to address what is becoming a broader epidemic. Priscilla Huff for teleSUR in Bethesda, Maryland.
Well, that's all for today's The Real USA. Don't forget to share your comments via our Twitter at teleSUR English. I'm Alexandra Hall. See you next time.